WOVU LP, Cleveland.
This is Open Door with Vince Robinson. In-depth conversations with people who are making a difference in the lives of others here and around the world. Culture is at the heart of who you are. Know your culture, find yourself on Open Door with Vince Robinson.
Hello and welcome to Open Door. I'm Vince Robinson, and my guest today is Mr. William C. Washington. I just found out what his middle name is. I've always been curious about that, so now I know. I'm not going to tell y'all unless he wants you to know.
Nobody really knows.
Okay. William is a licensed professional clinician and clinical hypnotherapist, as well as a collegiate-level adjunct faculty and counseling mentor. Graduated from John Carroll University with his master's in clinical mental health counseling. And he's currently a PhD candidate for the health and psychology program at Walden University. Also, William has something called the Washington Wellness Institute. Mm-hmm. So, deriving from that, you are a professional in the field of mental health. Mm-hmm. And that's what brings us together today. Yes. Someone reached out to me and said, we need to do a show about men's mental health. Mm. And I couldn't agree more with that, because mental health is something that we don't really focus on too much.
We don't. And usually there's a meme or a quick article, a 3-minute read, and a like here and a share here, and then that's it. We don't sit and talk about it.
Okay. Well, we're going to talk about mental health, and we're going to talk about men. And I'm just thinking right now, the first 3 letters of mental is MEN. Mm. Have you ever thought about that?
Yes, and I actually tried to make a program like that. But once again, I made a men's program, and no one showed up. No one talked about it. So that's what I'm saying. So I'm really glad that you're bringing this up.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for joining me today. I usually try to get some perspective from my guests on their history, and I was surprised to learn today that you're actually from Toledo, and you told me you grew up in Perrysburg.
Yep, grew up in Perrysburg, and I went to St. John's High School. So I'm a Glass City guy, Rocketown area, but all my family lives in Cleveland and the Ravenna area, so I would come up to Cleveland all the time. And Cleveland feels, I was born in Painesville, but raised in Toledo. But Cleveland always feels like home because it's where I always grew up at.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. When you think about it, Ohio is really an amazing state. I was watching a video just the other day, and they were talking about Akron being the rubber capital of the world.
Right.
And then in Toledo, I'm sure you have some
glass and lumber.
Glass,
yeah.
Right?
Yep, and we're also the train system all goes through, goes to Detroit, and just, especially as far as music goes, they always come through Toledo, going to Detroit, and so, we would have a lot of artists back in the day always come through Toledo. So it was a lot of really strong jazz and just artists just coming through there. So it was a lot of history and color in that city.
Yes. And speaking of history, and you mentioned high school, I couldn't walk away from the opportunity to just get a little jab in. I'm a graduate of Massillon Washington High School, and once upon a time, our football teams clashed on the field.
Yeah,
and what happened when you guys came together?
We went back home because if you did good enough to get to Massillon, you did a good job.
Right.
You're we're gonna try, but we're gonna go home proud that we got there. So it was always they're back again.
Yes. My senior year, and I'm not going to say which year it was, but Massillon actually had a 6-4 season.
Wow.
We played Cleveland Benedictine, and the game ended in a 0-0 tie. So wow. Benedictine must have been one heck of a football team.
Yeah.
In the same year, we played Cleveland East, and we beat Cleveland East 67. I think it was 67-3. So there wasn't much of a game, and at the time I was actually doing play-by-play because we had a closed-circuit television station, and it went out into the community.
You stayed there the whole time.
Yes. So that's quite a memory, but yeah. So moving forward, I just want to make it known that not only are you involved in the field of mental health, you are also a musician.
Yes.
having performed here in this space
Yes,
more than
place.
once.
Yes, I love playing here.
Yes.
It's a good energy here.
And you're also in a group called Morning a Black Star, and we can
Yes.
talk more about that as we can conclude the show, because I want to get to that.
Of course.
But let's jump into it. What drove you to the field of mental health?
That's a really great question. I like to always answer that simple because there's so many caveats to that. What drove me to mental health was that I wanted to help, but I understood that the helping I was doing was just Band-Aid work. And I realized as much as I was in the community, as much as I was serving, there was always something missing. And I realized that there are people that are more fragmented than I realized through helping. And so I wanted to understand, why are people more fragmented than they present, or why are they more fragmented than they don't want to be? And so I found mental health to kind of be an answer to something that was never truly answered. And there was a piece with that because there's a formula to humanity. And I wanted to understand the why in humanity. And sometimes service, it interacts, but it doesn't always bring resolve. And I feel like with mental health, there's at least an understanding. I think that's really one of the biggest reasons that I just saw a world that was undone, and I wanted to understand why.
So I would have to imagine that at the heart of that idea set that you had, there was something within you that wanted to be able to help people.
Yes, and I think, in seeing people trying to be human, and they tried to find ways to express that, and there was something missing, and so they had to keep going out their way to find something, when there was something internally that was never looked at. And so for me, when I look at the psyche of life, I start within. So I always look at the internal disposition rather than the external stimulus. And so I thought psychology was like a really great way to start getting curious about it.
So what was involved in your studies? How do you learn about the mind and how to have an impact on the mind as you take people through whatever therapeutic process you take them through?
Yeah, so how I am here now is not how I was in the beginning, right? I learned all of the great white scholars. I learned the Freudians, the Jungians, and I learned it all. I made sure that I was well versed. However, when it came to becoming eclectic, there was issues with that because people would always say, "Well, I'm an eclectic therapist. I'm an eclectic psychologist." Okay, I get what that means. It means that you don't want to focus in one form of thinking. But how does that work as far as being therapeutically accurate? And so, it's kind of like saying I'm a jazz artist, but also classical, but then I'm sitting in a salsa band doing classical music only. Like, no, there's a certain type of attitude that you have to have. And so I found that as I was learning the different type of therapies, I started getting into more holistic work with the psychological approach, which is why I'm doing my doctorate in health psychology. So it's taking modern medicine and untraditional practices and turning them into a therapeutic practice.
Okay. For the benefit of the listeners, we hear two different terms. We hear psychiatry and we hear psychology. Could you define both of those and establish what the differences are?
Yeah, of course. So when I think about a psychiatrist, I would think about their medical background. They focus more on the physical health or the Western medicine approach. They usually implement some type of medicinal or medication to help deal with psychological issues. But for a psychologist, they're more focused on the educational application of psyche or type of emotional distresses, and they can refer out or they can't. Some can prescribe medication, but they're more focused on the treatment rather than the actual Western solution-focused mindset.
Okay. So a psychiatrist is going to use chemicals to alter the brain chemistry to have an impact on behavior
Yes. And then psychologists focus more on the behavioral aspect rather than the chemical homeostasis that's needed.
Okay. What's interesting about that as I reflect on my TV watching days and just, just general knowledge from reading magazines and seeing things online and everything, that a lot of the pharmaceutical substances that are used to alter behavior have side effects that include suicidal thoughts and other kinds of things. From your perspective, what might be the issues in using chemicals to restore the chemical balance in the brain?
Yeah, I believe that as human beings, we are all given what we are required to live. Unfortunately, because of the way we eat food, the way that we sit, the way that we look at screens, it changes the chemical affect of our makeup. And as a result of that, we expose ourselves to another level of vulnerability that causes suicidal ideation. People think, I must be crazy to think suicidal. I'm like, no, if you can think about waking up, you can think about dying. If you can think about, killing yourself, you can think about living to your best life. And so it's really about what's reinforcing you to think that way. And a lot of times we don't get to that place, or we don't think we're allowed to think that way. And so that level of self-punishment creates and exacerbates those moments. So when the chemicals come into play, it's more of a legal correction, the CYA, so that they can say, hey, we talked about this. And unfortunately, when it comes to medicine and chemical, I do believe that some situations you do need to have some medical treatment, of course. However, if that medical treatment doesn't have a proactive ownership or emotional ownership, then you're definitely just exacerbating the situation, or you're just prolonging what's already currently there. Because by the time you need medication, you're already there. It's not, I think it's happening. It's typically, how can we do to stop it from where it's already at? So, the preventative measure is a little, it can be a little off sometimes.
Well, I think it's interesting just because we live in a society in which, we take a pill for everything. Something goes wrong, first thing we want to do is take a pill because it's like the easy way out.
You want vitamin D, go take a vitamin D pill. Instead of walking outside and taking a walk, go get a pill.
And perhaps it might be appropriate to take the pill, but go outside and get some sunshine.
To validate the physical awareness of yourself as well. Yeah. And that's the holistic aspect of modern treatment, is you can have the pill and live the life at the same time. And a lot of people think one or the other. And that door is still kind of, it's a hard door to open right now in society today.
Mm-hmm. I would also think that the food that we eat might also contribute to the chemistry in our brains that may affect us that way.
Yes, and I really, as I mentioned earlier, I think that, when I have, there's 10 types of depression, right? There's 10 types of depression. And when someone comes in and I do the assessment with them and I notice that it's a form of depression they're experiencing, the first thing I tell them to do is get a trainer, go work out for 30 days and come back to me. I just want to know, how much are you owning of your life, just nutrition. I don't need them to be like buff and strong, but I want them to see what it takes to have ownership of themselves, because a pill's not going to help you own yourself. It might make you more open to different things, but it won't let you take ownership of the self, which is what we all have. That's a human value that we all have a part of. And so, yeah.
Quite interesting. 13 minutes that have just flown by, and so much more to talk about. You're watching and listening to Open Door on 95.9 FM WOVU. I'm Vince Robinson. My guest is William C. Washington, and he is the proprietor of the Washington Wellness Institute. We're going to talk more mental health, and specifically men's mental health, when we return. This is 95.9 FM WOVU, a Burton-Bell Car community radio station. We'll be right back.
Are you or someone you know in need of help? Here's a resource you can turn to.
The Thea Bowman Center has been serving the community for over 50 years and provides services to help support Mount Pleasant and surrounding communities of all ages. Some of these programs include adult education like GED, computer classes, food pantry, senior outreach, youth after school, and summer programs, and much more. Are you a Cleveland resident in need of a GED preparation, a food pantry, youth or senior programs? Then call the Thea Bowman Center at 216 216-491-0669 or visit TheaBowmanCenter.org. Call the Thea Bowman Center at 216-491-0669 or visit TheaBowmanCenter.org to register today.
This message is brought to you by the Thea Bowman Center, NWOVU 95.9 FM, Our Voices United, a Burton Bell Carr community radio station.
Welcome back to Open Door with Vince Robinson and my guest, William C. Washington. He is a professional in the field of mental health. I read part of his bio at the beginning of this program. There's so much more to it, and we've established that not only is he a mental health specialist, but he's also a musician and a few other things that we don't know about that we'll get to when we come back. We talked about pharmaceuticals, and we also talked about the role that food plays in our mental health, and you suggested exercise, someone work out for 30 days and come back and see you. Talk about the impact of exercise in your brain chemistry.
Yes. Unfortunately, like I said before, we are already born with everything we have to grow, right? And it gets changed based upon what we eat, what we do, what we're around, what we watch. And so when it comes to exercise, it's one of the most natural forms of intelligence. So there's 7 types of intelligence. Mark Vitale talks about it all the time. And the body kinesthetic intelligence is one of the most first intelligence we ever learn, is understanding how my body is. In psychology, sometimes your body is trying to trigger things that you may not realize. And a lot of times your body reacts more than responds because it has to maintain a certain level to exist. And so a lot of times when we're not working out and you're not taking the time to do the walk or the calisthenics, or doing the stretching, every 30 minutes you're supposed to be up. We took our break. We should be standing up and resetting ourselves because we're meant to always be in motion. And so it's really important when it comes to mental health is, I ask, well, how well do you sleep? I think, what are you eating normally? They're like, why are you asking me all these regular questions? I'm like, because you're a regular human. And how you care about your body is also how you care about your mind. And that's how well you can connect with yourself as well. So it's so important. I'm not saying you have to be an Olympic runner but you have to be caring about how am I treating the space I'm living in. And that's the holistic aspect of life in psychology.
That's a really interesting share. I mean, that you should get up at least every 30 minutes.
Yes, minimum.
Yeah. I have an Apple Watch, and it talks to me.
Oh, good. Oh, yeah, those are great, yeah.
And it will tell me, stand for a minute. And it measures my progress. So it's watching me all the time that I have the watch on, and it's saying stand up, it's saying breathe, and these are things that we don't necessarily talk about, but at the same time, we have, for the most part, very sedentary lifestyles. I mean, if you work in an office, because there are some folks who are still doing that these days, you sit at a computer at a desk for hours. Minimum of 8. Yeah. And the brain only pays attention for about 4 to 5 hours. So there's about 3 hours in a day you're wasting being at your job because your brain only has 4, maybe 5 hours of actual aptitude to actually be present. So, the other 3 hours you're kind of like coasting somewhere else, but you're just doing, behavioral tasks that are repetition. There was a guest on a previous show that suggested that one of the best things that you can do is go for a walk.
Yes, I completely 100% agree with that. That is the first step to wellness is breathing, walking. I ask people, instead of saying, how are you doing today, I always say, did you breathe today? How's your breathing going today? Because a lot of them are like, I forgot to breathe. Yeah.
And then some of us don't breathe correctly.
I had to remind people, in with the nose, out with the mouth, and they all have to I'm like, let's think about this breath. Let's breathe in the stress, breathe out understanding. Breathe in stress, breathe out understanding. Okay. Taking that time out.
So I want to get into some of the whys that people are suffering, there are these acute childhood experiences that I've been made aware of. I think I watched a TED Talk sometime within the past couple of years, and there was this, it was actually a sister that did that TED Talk, and she was just talking about ACEs and how people might have multiple ACEs, and that the multiple ACEs affect them to an even greater extent.
Yes.
But can you talk about the impact of childhood trauma, and also talk about how you can undo some of the damage from that?
Yes,
traumas?
Of course. Before I say anything, your childhood never dies, right? One reason why I do really well with children is because I treat them as adults without the resources, and they love that because they feel like they're completely capable. And so you think about how the brain already has the power to work. And so there's a lot of repressed memories or repressed emotions that children have, which means the brain is consciously stopping you from experiencing the emotional pain or stimulus. And to be clear, trauma is defined as any emotional trigger that goes beyond the normal emotional experience. So that can be anything. It doesn't have to be a war-torn thing, or it doesn't have to be something, like 9/11. Or it can be something as simple as an argument that you're watching. It could be watching someone else get beat up. It could be, you watching TV and you watching a scary movie for the first time. And so when it comes to these acute, childhood, issues, one of the biggest things is understanding that it's not what I think, it's how you feel. So as a therapist, that's what I think, first of all. And as you get older, your brain actually learns how to move on with the learned behavior, regardless if it's healthy or not. It's doing what it needs to survive, because the body is meant to survive. And so you create this emotional callus. So as an adult, you have this emotional callus, and then you might find a relationship, or you might find a friendship that brings back these childhood-like feelings that may not have been able to have been expressed in the past, which is why we have these ups and downs in relationships. It's because children want to learn how to play again. Adults want to learn how to play it again. And so when you're dealing with traumas, it's understanding the emotional responsibility and having the emotional articulation to actually move forward. So for me, the biggest thing is, do I understand the emotional experience that I'm doing? Do I understand what somebody else or how they're triggering me? What part of this is my responsibility? And am I able to say that? And a lot of times as adults, we don't have the assertive language needed to deal with the moments that we're actually in. Especially in the black community, we always have phrases. It is what it is, or it be like that sometimes. It don't really be like that sometimes. And it isn't really what it really is. And there's some responsibility that has to happen. And so when we have these triggers and these stimulating things that happen that cause these awarenesses of our childhood trauma, we have to understand how much of that do we own and how much of that are we projecting onto other people. Think of all the relationships that we probably shouldn't have had if we understood what our heart was really trying to say. Or did we really say what our heart felt, and now we're stuck in this situation and don't know how to get out because we weren't taught how to do that as a child? So I really believe that adults are really the product of trial and error, and they feel like they have to live in their error rather than believing in the trials that they have to take. And so I see adults the same way. I think adults are just children that are trying to try.
It's interesting when you talk about, one, you use the term trigger, which I've been hearing so much more these days.
It's a social word. The social life is really, social media has made it popular.
Yep. And then something else that you said that was significant to me, and that was assertive language. Because a lot of our communication is repressed for various reasons. Sometimes we don't say things because we're afraid it's going to hurt the other person's feelings.
And that's projection.
Yeah. Or there are other reasons that we might not communicate. Perhaps there's something within us that is afraid to just speak because we've been put in a place where we weren't allowed to use our voice.
We were put in the child's place.
Yeah.
And that's not child's place. Well, if you have 2 ears and 2 eyes and a mouth, And that's the whole culture. That's a cultural thing where you don't think you have a place. And so we've taught that we don't have a place sometimes. And in relationships, that stimulus might actually be triggered where we feel like we don't have a place in a conversation that we actually created. And that's amazing. And so, like, when I work with people to create assertive language, I'm teaching them how to speak at an age-appropriate language, age-appropriate emotional language. And so you have aggressive language, you have passive language, you have passive-aggressive language, but we never really talk about assertive language. And I have to teach that all the time to adults. And, kids are really good at learning assertive language, but adults aren't, because it makes them have to own how they really feel rather than using the thought of being an adult to be avoidant.
Mm-hmm. Let's go and deal with the whole idea of men. We were speaking earlier, and you just mentioned that you were having these programs for men, and they weren't showing up.
They weren't.
What is it about men that makes them so afraid to approach the idea of having counseling?
So let's start with the identity of what manhood is, right? So for me, manhood is defined as something hard to keep, easy to lose, right? Hard to keep, easy to lose. That's based upon patriarchy. That's based upon cultural expressions. It's based upon just our societal imbalance of what we think is a man. And so usually your manhood is based upon the attempts that you're trying to make and the gestures and the expressions that you're trying to make. And so these programs I was trying to make would always start, unfortunately, from my past, what I've noticed is that most manhood programs are all about how to be a man, or it's always about what we need to be doing as a man, or it's this is the problem with men. It's never just come because you're a man. And so it's already coming from a passive-aggressive or aggressive or some type of way that's going to question the existence of their manhood. So when I make these programs, they're like, well, let's make it a nice catchy title. And I'm like, how about we just say, come as you are, and we'll see what they want to talk about. There's not a program like that, and well, until now. and so it's one of those things where when it comes to men, we always bring these characteristics, accountability, providing, these very strong words that sound really good, but it's different for every single man. And so there's this level of emotional limitation that's put into the definition of manhood. And so I'm hoping that today we can really talk about that.
Yeah, let's talk about it. They say that a man is not supposed to cry, but then there's something therapeutic about crying. Sometimes you just got to let it out.
Yes.
You can't be afraid to feel what you're feeling in that moment, and you have that moment, and then the tears, they have the function of cleansing you or whatever biological thing happens when the tears flow.
Your body is literally reacting healthy, and it's like, or you see like them watching a movie and like, why are you crying at this? Like we're watching Rocky and you see him win, you see the emotion, the passion, and dude's crying, and it's like, why are you crying in Rocky? It's not about Rocky winning. It's the feeling of overcoming and achieving and letting yourself over on something. And recently the last movie I cried on was actually a Free Guy. It was with Ryan Reynolds, and it was just the beauty of him finally breaking free of the expectation. And I was like, that's me. I'm like, and they're like, why are you crying in this? I'm like, because I actually see what it takes. I see myself in that. And a lot of men today, I think, express themselves very well with people they trust. And unfortunately, when you ask a man, like, who do you vent to? They're like, like, I don't know. Or they use substances to self-medicate, or they use, something to feel something. And unfortunately, that emotional ownership is created into an avoidant behavior. And so these programs that we're trying to create, there's a level of need, right? There's a level of need of just transparency. I don't need your honesty. I don't need your lies. I need your transparency. And we don't ask men to be transparent. We ask them to become something or to remove themselves.
Okay, we're going to talk a bit more about that as we continue with Open Door on 95.9 FM WOVU. This is Open Door. I'm Vince Robinson, and my guest is this clinical psychologist.
Clinical therapist. I'm almost done.
He's going to be a psychologist in a few.
Yes.
But I'm just giving him an early promotion. We'll be right back after these messages.
It's okay to not be okay, meaning you're not alone in how you feel and what you're going through. There are millions of others who are either facing the same thing that you're facing or have faced it and lived to talk about it. So the other thing I would offer is it's also okay to ask for help.
This message of hope is from the Alcohol, Drug, Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board of Cuyahoga County, the Suicide Prevention Coalition, and WOVU 95.9 FM, Our Voices United, a Burton Bell Carr community radio station.
We're back. Open Door with Vince Robinson and the clinical therapist.
Yes.
Mr. William C. Washington C. You'll have to find out sometime in the future. But we were just talking about the whole idea of defining manhood. And interestingly enough, there was a gathering in this space a few days back where you had one side of the room was women, the other side of the room was men. And the question was asked, what defines a man? What defines a woman? What are the roles based on gender? It was a really rewarding conversation.
Wow.
And interestingly enough, last year I tried to do a similar event, but I called it the Vagina Monologues. Catchy phrase, right? Catchy title.
Yeah. Everybody's like, oh, what? Yeah.
But nobody can.
Sounds about right. Yeah. Sure?
But I just think that it's important for men and women to have conversations too. But since we're talking about men, and we talked about the need to express, and sometimes that expression comes in the form of tears, could you talk a bit about why it's so difficult for men to emote?
So I always start with the conditioning whenever it comes with that. For men to emote, think about, just let's say for TV, when do you ever see men emote in cartoons, right? You think about, it's never really men emoting on cartoons or movies, or if it is, it's because something happened and it's like this revenge moment or this some type of triumph and they have to prevail over this situation. So a lot of times for men to have to emote, there has to be some kind of heroic story or some type of uprising for them to feel emotionally capable of bringing themselves to that place. And also what I've also seen is men actually do emote, but they don't express it in a way that people may say it's serious. So if someone goes like, nah, I'm just really sad right now. Well, they may not have the right language. They really might be saying, I'm depressed. I might have suicidal ideation. But they don't know what that means. They just know, yeah, I'm just feeling sad right now. And then someone goes, oh, well, you're going to work, you're getting your job, you're doing good, you're doing things, so you're a good man. Like you're doing, but in all the other time, he's creating this emotional cancer. And so in our institute, we talk about emotional cancers. And there's the 4 R's. It's regret, reaction, resentment, and rationalizing. And a lot of times men rationalize their experience and their emotional existence because they see other people thriving on behalf of their output. But they never talk about their input. And that's a space where a lot of men don't thrive in because there's not a space for that. So when you had your vagina monologue, that was a space for them, but do they see it as an input? And is it being told to them that this is your place to do this without repercussions? Because I've seen a lot of men actually do a lot of emotions, but it's seen as toxic. Or we call it toxic masculinity. Or we see it as, egotistical or arrogant or narcissist. And all these other words that are clinical words, but they're using it for social attacking. There's this level of anti-fragility with men. And unfortunately, we don't create that space for them to be unsure of themselves, which is why you have these reactions. And so my second principle is any unmet need results in irrational behavior. So there's a lot of men with unmet needs, and there's a lot of irrational behaviors as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. So in relationships, men have unmet needs, women have unmet needs, and sometimes what could be really beneficial is for these two parties to sit down with a third party and have a conversation that enables them to say the things that they may not feel comfortable expressing otherwise. And I say that as someone who has been through that process and see the benefit of it. But, for the most part, most men, oh, no, I don't need that, or, no, I'm not going to do it for me, I'll do it for you.
Right.
And they're in denial about the fact that, you might need to do this to get some correction. Can you talk about the resistance to the idea of having counseling or therapy?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'll give both sides to that. I'm a very objective counselor, so it's really beneficial for men, and sometimes it's really not beneficial. And what I mean by that is, it is very beneficial because a lot of times when they're in the couples therapy or they're in the couples session, they end up realizing that what they're upset about or what they're angry about or why they have to be there, they end up that they have a lot of stuff that they have to deal with before they even get to the relationship. So then that means that they have to go back and get their own therapist for their own individual stuff and then come to a couples therapist because they realize that the way that they were thinking about their partner, it actually wasn't healthy because it was a reaction. One of the emotional cancers, it was a reaction, or it was a personal regret for themselves, or there was personal resentment from something else that had nothing to do with their partner, and unfortunately their partner created an emotional connection or emotional trigger for them for something they didn't resolve in their past. And then another way is, unfortunately, depending on the type of therapist you get, because every therapist is different, they'll feel attacked because when they express themselves, it may come off more strong, or it may come off more because it has a masculine tone or a presence. So it makes it seem like they're deflating or they're gaslighting. We say that word a lot now. And it's really just how they express it because they've never had a space to actually learn how to express. And unfortunately, we like I said, manhood is hard to keep, easy to lose. So knowing that you're in a session that's geared solely on the emotional existence of your life, how I'm going to express myself is going to be very political because I don't want to have to take that home after the session. Like, I can't believe you told the therapist this about me. Now I can't see them anymore. We're getting a new therapist, and you better not talk about that part. And so that was a therapist's responsibility to be like, hey, what stays here, that's it. And that's all that's going to happen. But we have to create that culture. There's no therapy culture right now, right? We have a healing culture, but there's no therapeutic culture happening. And that's what I'm hoping to promote more of, because you can go online and get your self-help books anywhere you want, but there's a therapeutic language that needs to happen in our culture, in our relationships. That's not being implemented at all. I think the closest thing might have been the 5 love languages. That would have been the closest, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Interesting enough, somebody gave me that book to read.
So I love it. I met the creators of it. Great people, great things. I love it. It's a great way for language and bringing up conversation. But there's some plot holes in it. And we'll talk about that's a whole nother time. But there's some holes into that I have to bring up that people don't consider in that. But it's a good start. Mm-hmm. It's definitely a good start.
Yeah, and it can be, course altering in terms of relationships when you understand someone is expressing to you what their needs are and basically how you can meet their needs if you address those things. Mm-hmm. So it is beneficial. But, the other thing that I just wanted to mention is that a lot of times the dysfunction in our relationships is based on misunderstanding. And the misunderstanding exists because we don't really effectively communicate with each other,
Yes, and also accept what we actually are experiencing in ourselves. A lot of times what you express to your partner is usually a reaction based upon what you haven't resolved of yourself. So if it's called the +1 effect, right? So if you marry somebody that, if let's say if my father was an alcoholic, I marry someone that is an alcoholic, but they only do it on the weekends. They don't do it during the weekday. So it's the +1. So a lot of times if we don't resolve what we've went through, especially in our traumas, it usually shows up in our relationships. And there's a thing called the Imago theory that says, childhood never dies. And the last stage of childhood is actually marriage, because you usually marry the reflection of your emotional unresolve. And so you have the power as an adult, supposedly, to be the change that your past partner or your past parent could have been. So you try to become the answer in that relationship when it really was you not settling your own traumas.
Mm-hmm. So as a therapist, how do you address those things that come up in those sessions and move that couple or that person towards, resolution of whatever the issues might be?
Mm-hmm. I make them focus on what the actual problem is. So, I tell them in the beginning, like, I'm not here to keep you two together, or whoever partners you have, I'm not here to keep you all together. I'm not here to separate you. I'm not here to do anything. I'm here to understand why is it important to be present with each other today. And so usually when you're in a relationship, it's like, oh, we have to make it or else, or it's, I'm done with this. We got to figure out how to get rid of this. I don't really want to focus on that. I want to focus on what's being created between you two. And so for me, what I find is allowing them to recognize how each person has triggered each other. Because once again, it's how we play with each other, back to childhood. How well do you play with so for me, the relationships is in stages. So you have the compatibility stage, the companion stage, the couplehood stage, the partnership, and then the marriage. And so a lot of times we want this companionship, but we didn't really focus on the compatibility. Or we want this couplehood lifestyle where it looks like, hey, we're doing this, we're this image together, but we didn't really work on how well we play together, which is the companion stage. And so I kind of move it in that type of direction because a lot of times you realize that your partner is a reflection of things that you're trying to resolve in yourself. And so they're the answer to something that you're avoiding. And so once again, unmet needs result in irrational behaviors. And so I try to create a better language, relational language. And I try to make sure that each partner has a space to not be victimized or to be villainized for their existence in each other's lives. Because there's a victim and there's a villain. And how that's created can make or break a relationship.
Okay. In terms of men, how can we move men towards a point where they are more willing to rely on therapy as a means of resolving their issues?
I think we are already in a place where people know that it's important to get therapy. Before we just say, like, black people don't know about therapy. We do know about therapy. We do. So that's not an excuse anymore. I think what it is how do we stay actively healing? And so for men, I highly encourage men to understand that their change doesn't happen overnight. Their change happens internally, and you externally see it when you accept the world that you're living in. And so when I think about men's health, I think of it in 8 different ways. And so a lot of times when they come to me, I think of the 8 different ways of their healing, which is mental, emotional, social, family, environmental, occupational, financial. And you can even put spiritual in there as well. And so for men, I think it's important to understand that you have a space, and the space is yours, and it won't be taken away from you. And a lot of times in therapy, they don't realize what can be said inside and outside. And so once again, it goes back to therapeutic language. They don't see that therapy is personal, it's private. We don't talk about this outside. Even in couples, they're like, well, we talk about this after we leave. I'm like, no, you should focus on the homework, and then you guys can talk about it then, and we'll talk about when it's time to talk about it. Just because it has to be in the confines, and usually men are not in the proper environment to express themselves.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that one of those environments that may not be so proper is the way Jan Van Zant was doing it on television in front of the whole world.
When I tell you, like, I love the TV of it. I appreciate the entertainment of it. But I was on pins and needles. I felt like a cat, like just my back was arched, just like, whoo, because I was just looking at. I just saw so much polarizing. Just so polarizing, and it's cool for entertainment, but that's not good for the soul.
Yeah, it's great for TV, but it's not so good for the folks who are going through the process.
Right. Yeah.
Quite interesting information, and we'll get back to it when we return. You're listening to Open Door on 95.9 FM WOVU with Vince Robinson and William C. Washington, the clinical hypnotherapist. We'll be right back.
It's okay to not be okay, meaning you're not alone in how you feel and what you're going through. There are millions of others who are either facing the same thing that you're facing or have faced it and lived to talk about it. So the other thing I would offer is it's also okay to ask for help.
This message of hope is from the Alcohol, Drug, Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board of Cuyahoga County, the Suicide Prevention Coalition, and WOVU 95.9 FM, Our Voices United, a Burton Bell Carr community radio station.
Hi, I'm Sophie Absolutely.
I'm E-Rock Beats.
Welcome to The Circle,
where healing is building. And you're listening to WOVU 95.9 FM,
Burton Bell Carr Community Radio.
Hi, this is Vince Robinson of Open Door, inviting you to listen to this program and others on my YouTube podcast channel, where you can receive notifications, listen to past shows, and get alerts on future broadcasts. You can also find me on Facebook as Vince Robinson and follow Larchmere Arts, as well as Instagram at vince.robinson. Here's a quick update on events at Larchmere Arts. Vocalist Acacia returns for an evening of jazz and R&B vocals on Saturday, December 4th at 7 p.m. Neo-soul poetry, music, and the spoken word returns on December 18th. For details, check the Larchmere Arts events page on Facebook. Now, back to Open Door with Vince Robinson and guest William C. Washington. Welcome back to Open Door with Vince Robinson and my guest today, William C. Washington, clinical therapist, musician, and husband, a whole bunch of other names that we could put on him. We've talked about therapy for men, women, couples. We've talked about what it takes to recover, the restorative process that's involved in it, and something that I really want to focus on, because folks who know me know that I'm all about holistic health. You know, when we talk about health, usually there is an emphasis on the physical part. You know, when we talk about spirituality, there are so many different lanes that folks travel in. It's, you know, it's hard to figure out, well, what's right for me or whatever. And then there's the whole idea of mental health. We talked about the pharmaceutical approach that goes through psychiatry, but you were also talking about basically behavioral therapy. And I noted on your bio, hypnotherapy.
Yes.
So I definitely want to talk about the power of hypnosis.
Yes.
How do you use hypnosis as a tool in your therapeutic process?
Yes, of course. So for me, there's different types of hypnotherapy, and the one that I use is heart-centered therapy. And so what I do is, it's a form of relaxation. So no, you won't turn into a duck and quack, and it's not something like that. It's a level of meditation and relaxation. And so, as I say, the brain uses only 10%, and then the 90% is subconscious or layers, kind of like the iceberg, right? You see the tip of the iceberg, and then the whole rest. That's no different than your brain. And so, with heart-centered therapy, is I create a form of relaxation that helps that other 90% to be accessed. And through that, I use suggestive language, suggestive actions. My language changes so that the brain can actually do age regression. And so we do a lot of rising and lowering of extinguishing behaviors. So, for instance, if you're meditating, we create an anchor. And an anchor is like the most safest place you go into. And what I do through the hypnosis is I implant egos. And so what an ego is the active measurement of your emotional wellness in surrounding the other people. So the ego is always wondering, well, are people watching? Are people doing this? Or this? They're always wondering, like, is this enough? That's why we get like the self-esteem things and those things happening. So if I can implant a healthy ego into a traumatic childhood, we would resolve that. And so what I would do is I would create a meditative state, create an anchor. I would find the issue that you might be having. We raise it by increasing the meditative state to making sure that it comes at a really strong emotional place. And then we talk about what's happening in that moment. What's happening here? What do you think about yourself? And then we say, well, what would you like to do in this part? What would you like to see happen? we take that healthy ego, we implement that, and we allow that ego to take over in that past life or that lowered age. And at the end, we conclude it with, well, what do you think about yourself now at that age? What do you think about this? So we help you detach from those traumas, those triggerings, those conditioned behaviors that have created you to become who you had to survive to be. There are so many people here that are surviving based upon their trauma, and they believe in their trauma so much that they don't even know their own identity. They believe in the identity of their trauma. And so you think about how many people are walking around fragmented in this way. And there's nothing wrong with being fragmented if you understand your why. This is what we're talking about. And so that hypnosis, the heart-centered therapy, is about implanting healthy parts of yourself into traumatic pasts. And so in doing that, we also have our own language. We have our own understanding. Like people that smoke, for us, smoking isn't just smoking. Smoking is a form of suicide. It's suffocation. So what's going on in your ability to breathe or not breathe that's causing you to feel like you need to remember to breathe? What are you feeling pressured about? What are you feeling controlled about or uncontrolled about? And so those are the type of things that we work on. And I've had people that have come for weight loss as well, and they've lost 50 to 100 pounds, people that are morbidly obese. And because their addiction to food, physical health, they have a poor relationship with food. And so I implement an emotional ego into their relationship with food. And they find out that their food is a reflection of their grandfather who, was very abusive to them. And so now when they look at cupcakes, they think about that age and they think about who I am today now because I've implanted this ego. It changes the behavior. And so that's the behavioral therapy aspect of it, and that's the more of the holistic approach to it. And then we get into the traumatic stuff, more psychological route afterwards. But the hypnosis, the heart-centered therapy, is a controlled meditative state that allows people to go back and to experience that part of them again. And sometimes, it's not always pretty too. I've had, I had a lot of vets do it with a lot of war. I've had people come in with many different traumatic things as children, and you see that part come out in them again, and they are crying. And a lot of men are saying they always wanted to stand up for themselves. They always wanted to say something. They just couldn't do it. And they're saying that at the age of 3 years old, not understanding why. And then when we snap out of it and they're back, they have to have conversations with their family members because they realize the things that they forgot. And it's that ownership that men have been stripped of, that emotional ownership that men have been stripped of. That's really been my biggest thing I've seen, is that there are so many 15-year-old boys that are emotionally stripped because they just have to make it by through high school. And that's why those things like basketball, video games, these things they believe in that because it's the one thing that they can feel emotionally controlled with. Unfortunately, if you see a tall black kid and he's really tall and muscular, you must play basketball, but he wants to be a computer software engineer. That's just the way that our culture just categorizes.
Or he could want to be a dancer.
And they have to
ballet
wait.
dancer.
Ballet dancer, and they have to wait another 15, 20 years to finally find a class when they could have. Think about why is it that Ice Cube is now considered a family actor? You see, what if Ice Cube could have been an actor in high school and he didn't have to go through all that lifestyle when he could just been an actor? It's like they have to make it through the stereotypical route or the hidden route, the emotionally damped route, to become what they truly wanted to be.
I'm curious about the process of trance. When you take someone into trance and then you use the term snap out of it, when they're in trance, do they have any awareness of being in trance? And when they come out of trance, do they remember what happened while they were in trance?
Yes, I make sure of that. So when they're in trance, usually what happens is I'll notice that their eyes start blinking a little more. They start looking at the ceiling and they start focusing on one spot. They're truly relaxed. I'll say suggestive phrases like, it must be nice to be this way. It feels good to be this way. It feels good to be not this way. It doesn't feel good to be this way. Just to see where they're connecting with their mind. I have them hold their index finger and their thumb together as a way to remember their anchor which is the safe place in their life because they're going to traumatic environments in their mind. So when I say hold your index finger and your thumb, that lets me know, because usually what they won't see it, but I'll see their body physically changing. They'll start sweating. They'll start thinking about things. They'll start, because their brain is literally opening themselves back up to those pasts. And so when we have an extinguishing moment, that's when that trance becomes active. And I'm always talking to them. And so sometimes that extinguishing period, when they're in their trance, they might have to sit up and they have to hit a pillow to get out a feeling that they've repressed. And then once that feeling's out, they sit back down. We go through the trance again. And then we start implementing healthy egos. And so that extinguishing behavior, we extinguish past lives. We extinguish past emotions that were not aligned or congruent with who we want to be today. And so that healthy ego does matter. And a lot of times there's a lot of people with poor self-esteem and high self-concept, or high self-concept and low self-esteem. It goes back and forth. It switches often. So I think with the trance, we don't realize it, but we hit it a lot, but we don't stay in it. And so it's kind of my job to help them stay in that moment so they can be conscious of that moment. Because as long as they're listening to my voice, it'll be okay.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting having this conversation about hypnotherapy, and I'm reminded of a woman by the name of Dolores Cannon. And she would take people into past lives. She would use past life regression as a means of curing them of diseases. So there's been testimonies that people have had cancer, and through hypnotherapy, they've been able to rid themselves of cancer.
Yes, and there is so much mental health when it comes to cancer. My gosh. I think one of the first things when you find out you have cancer is to create your village. That's the first thing that you know. Right, get your village, get your community, and change the diet. Those things, right? And I've seen miracles, and I did not believe in this. I'm telling you, when I came in, I was like, I'll see what happens. I even tried to lie. I did an exercise on me. I tried to lie about a pain I was feeling. I went back to the womb. And I asked my mom, I'm like, was there a moment ever before I was born, like, were you and Dad ever, And she's like, yeah, right before you were born, because we were arguing about what your name is going to be. And my name was supposed to be James. and we talked about that, and it was a whole thing. And it was like a real issue with my family about that. And it's amazing that what the conversations come up and how much you repress. We were, as black people, we repress so much. We have so much repression, and it comes out in the most irrational ways. It does.
Okay. We were supposed to get to the other side of William C.
Oh, yes.
Time has run out on us, but I definitely want folks to have a means of connecting with you, so you can shout out your website.
Yes. You can go to WashingtonWellnessInstitute.org or WWILLC.org. And you can look us up. You can see the different holistic programs we have. You can also get a therapist. We have a sexologist. We have licensed clinical social workers. I've created a virtual reality world for healing recently. So I do virtual reality therapy, do hypnosis. I also created a new spiritual program for healing, so you can heal and process in content. It's really about what you're looking for. We pretty much probably have it. And it's all telehealth as well, so you can do it from the comfort of your own house. And if you do want to come in, just let us know. We just bought a new building on 185th. We just bought it, so we'll be moving in there next month. But we have an office still on 185th in LaSalle. But yeah, we are ready for it, and we're implementing ourselves in the community one person at a time.
It's great to see the progress that you've made in such a short period of time. So I just wanted to make sure that people had a way to connect to you, and we can also put your website on the description of this program that will be posted on YouTube.
Perfect.
And I also want to underscore the importance of and the significance of hypnotherapy as a tool. Trance is a very powerful thing.
So powerful.
You know, trance can
so powerful.
It can turn your life around. And we talk about meditation, and meditation is about trance.
Right.
So you take yourself into trance and you manage that self. You don't necessarily have to have a therapist to do that.
Exactly.
It's something that you can do on your own. So just want to put that out there so folks know. I would highly recommend consulting a mental health professional if you're having issues with anxiety, depression, or any of those kinds of things.
Anything DSM related, I can diagnose and help with that. So anything in that purple diagnosing book, I know it front and backwards.
Okay. Well, William C. Washington, it's been an absolute pleasure to meet with you today.
It was a good time to see you again.
Yes, and we're going to get you back on this stage with that trombone or those mouth harps or whatever, so we can make some great music that could foster some healing in folks.
Look, as long as you're playing keys, I'm all right with that.
All right. Wonderful. Thanks for joining me, and thank you for joining us on Open Door with Vince Robinson. Know yourself, love yourself, be yourself, make today your very best day.